So we have a sudden transition from this pair of men to a pair of female characters. I think this is the section of the story where the wolf's hostility is most plain. And there is almost a sense of, socio-economic snobbery in her hostility towards these two women. Neither of them are named, and they're both represented in a way that makes them seem extremely limited. So we have this sudden shift without reference to the snail either here. Following his steps so closely as to be slightly puzzled by his gestures came two elderly women of the lower middle class, and there's an explicit demarcation of their economic status because the insane man is someone from a higher socioeconomic class than these women, and so there's a sense of fascination about the way they approach him. One is stout and ponderous, and the other rosy-cheeked and nimble. So the characterization here is of these two women as opposites in terms of their vitality and I think their morbidity, or the opposition between vitality and morbidity. One is fat and ponderous, and the other is kind of red-faced and nimble and seems alive. Like most people of their station, they were frankly fascinated by any signs of eccentricity, betokening a disordered brain, suggesting a disordered brain, especially in the well-to-do. So there's an almost a sense of class voyeurism about the way that they behave. They're fascinated by this old man because he's from the upper classes and he's mad. But they were too far off to be certain whether the gestures were merely eccentric or genuinely mad. So in spite of the fact they're determined, they still fail to grasp or connect with this man. So even though they're scrutinizing him in great detail, they don't really actually fully understand him. And so the theme of alienation is evident there. After they had scrutinized the old man's back in silence for a moment and given each other a queer, sly look, they went on energetically piecing together their very complicated dialogue. And so there's a sense of their connecting to each other here without any communication. There's no communication in this. They scrutinise the old man's back in silence for a moment and give each other a queer, sly look that they are carrying out a moment of negative self-affirmation, that they're bonding together without saying anything, purely by basically mocking this insane old man. And then there's a real sense of sardonic sarcasm in the tone of the narrator towards these characters here. They went on energetically piecing together their very complicated dialogue, which is deliberately sarcastic and ironic. Because Nell, Bert, Lot, says, Phil, Pie says, I says, she says, I says, I says. My Bert, sis, Bill, Grandad, the old man, sugar, sugar, flour, kippers, green, sugar, sugar, sugar. And so the irony here is that the conversation that they make makes just as little sense as the insane man's. It's deliberately nonsensical dialogue in order to either portray, I think, the possibility that they're mocking him. But even if that is the case, that in doing so, they mimic this insanity that they're supposedly mocking. The ponderous woman looked through the pattern of falling words at the flowers standing cool, and so there's a sense of synesthesia here, that she's seeing the pattern, the words themselves in physical embodiment, and that I think it captures a sense of the distance of her mind from the things that she's saying them but not really even engaging them. And she starts looking at the flowers. So in the same way that the old insane man was easily distracted by the flower bed, so are these women. The flowers standing cool, firm and upright in the earth with a curious expression. So she, just like the insane man, is mesmerized. Synesthesia, by the way, in case I didn't explain it clearly, is when you have sensory mixture. So we've got the sight, the imagined sight of the words being mixed with the sound of actually hearing them. And she's looking through the pattern of words at the flowers. So it's imagining that we can actually see the words themselves, and that by doing so, she sort of distances herself from those words and shows that her focus is entirely on the flower bed that she's mesmerized by. And so, in spite of their differences, the effect of this natural scene is comparable to this supposedly sane woman as it was to the old man. She saw them as a sleeper waking from a heavy sleep sees a brass candlestick reflecting the light in an unfamiliar way, and closes his eyes and opens them, and seeing the brass candlestick again, finally starts broad awake and stares at the candlestick with all his powers. This is a moment of what we'd call revivification. She's brought back to life. She's revitalized through the beauty of nature and its apperception. So one of the things you'll see on the Knowledge Organizer from modernism are these moments of epiphany, and it's something that Woolf actually deliberately talked about, moments of being. What we see here is this woman actually having one of these unfolding as she perceives this natural scene. And so the extended metaphor that Woolf uses here to portray this as a brass candlestick reflecting the light in an unfamiliar way, closes his eyes and opens them and sees the brass candlestick again and starts broad awake and stares at the candlestick with all his powers. So this is a sense of rebirth, of renewed perception and consciousness that I think has caused this woman to have a sense of perception that the other one doesn't. So the heavy woman came to a standstill opposite the oval-shaped flower bed and ceased even to pretend to listen to what the other woman was saying. And so again, even though these two have taken great pleasure in bonding with each other by being critical of someone else, they've lost the ability to communicate. They've lost their social code, and nature has been responsible for dissolving this. The power of nature has collapsed their social code and their superficial bonding. She stood there letting the words fall over her. Again, that sense of synesthesia, of tactile imagery with audible imagery of the sound of the words. Swaying the top part of her body slowly backwards and forwards, looking at the flowers, and now she seems insane and mesmerized. Then she suggested that they should find a seat and have their tea. And so here, she is mesmerized, but not given her subjectivity. So unlike the man whose mind we do kind of delve into through the narrator, she seems to be undergoing a similarly almost hypnotic experience looking at the flowers. But Woolf doesn't choose to give us her thoughts, and I think that deliberate decision to stay in objective third person here at this moment tells us an awful lot about the tone of the narrator, that she sees at this moment in time these characters through a critical lens.